The morning I stood in the doorway of that old house for the last time, I did not cry. I had promised myself I wouldn't. 41 years of living inside those walls, and I stood there with a cardboard box in my hands, alone, listening to the way the hardwood floor still creaked beneath my feet, the same way it always had the same sound it made when my husband used to get up before dawn to start the coffee. I stood there, and I breathed. And I told myself that the quiet was not emptiness. I told myself it was just quiet. My name is Dorothy, and I am 72 years old. I taught 4th grade at Riverside Elementary in Asheville, North Carolina for 31 years. I raised 2 children in that house on Birchwood Lane. I buried my husband from it. And on the Saturday morning, I was supposed to leave it forever. Only one person showed up to help me. His name is Noah. He is my grandson. He was 23 years old that morning, and he drove 4 hours from Charlotte with a rented trailer and a paper bag of biscuits from a place on the highway he knew I liked. He knocked on the door at 7:15 in the morning, and when I opened it, he smiled and said, "Okay, Grandma, let's do this." And I had to look away because I did not want him to see my face. I want to tell you how I got to that morning, because it didn't start there. It started long before. My husband, Gerald, passed in the spring of the year before. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 11 weeks, which is both a mercy and a cruelty, depending on the hour you're living through. We had been married 49 years. He was the kind of man who fixed things without being asked, who remembered every birthday without writing them down, who still held my hand in the car when he drove, even after all those years, the way you only do when the habit comes from something real. The children came for the last week of his life. My son, Michael, flew in from Denver. My daughter, Karen, drove up from Savannah. They were there, and I was grateful for that. I want to be fair. In those 11 days, they were present. They sat with their father. Michael told him stories about fishing trips they'd taken when the kids were young. Karen brought his favorite peach preserves, even though by then he couldn't eat much of anything. They were there, and I hold that. But grief is long, and visits are short. 2 weeks after the funeral, Michael flew back to Denver. Karen drove back to Savannah. And I was in that house on Birchwood Lane with Gerald's reading glasses still on the nightstand and his coffee mug still in the cabinet, and I did not know yet how heavy a house can feel when the person who filled it is gone. I called Michael on a Tuesday evening about a month after. I wasn't calling to burden him. I just wanted to hear his voice. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounded distracted, and after about 4 minutes he said, "Mom, I'm sorry, I have a call I need to take." I said, "Of course." I hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I called Karen the following week. She talked for 20 minutes, but mostly about her kitchen renovation and a problem she was having with a neighbor. I listened. I asked questions. When I finally said, quietly, that I was having some hard nights, she said, "Mom, you need to get out more. Join a book club or something." Then her other line rang, and she said she'd call me back. She didn't call me back that day, or the next. I want to be careful not to make myself sound like a saint, because I am not one. I am a woman who has made her share of mistakes. I probably worked too many evenings when the children were young. I probably expected Gerald to carry more of the emotional weight of the family than was fair to him. I have things I would do differently, but I also know what it is to sit in a house that was once full and feel the specific weight of being someone's afterthought. I started to think about the house. It was too much for one person. 4 bedrooms, a big yard, the kind of upkeep that Gerald had always managed, and that I was not equipped to manage alone. My neighbor, Ruth, who had been my friend for 22 years, came over one afternoon and said what I was already thinking. "Dorothy," she said, setting her teacup down, "you don't have to stay here just because leaving feels like losing him again." Ruth was 70 years old, and she had lost her own husband 8 years before. She understood things that other people could only approximate. I started to think about the condo complex on Merriweather Road, single floor, low maintenance, a small community of people my age. I had driven past it a dozen times. I made an appointment to see a unit in October. I walked through the rooms and stood at the window that looked out over a courtyard with a big oak tree, and I thought, I could learn to live here. I think I could learn to be okay here. I didn't tell the children right away. I wanted to be sure in my own mind first. But in November, I called Michael and I told him I was thinking of selling Birchwood Lane and moving to the Merriweather condo. There was a silence on the line that lasted just a beat too long. Selling the house? He said. Yes, I said. It's too large for me alone. And the upkeep. Mom, that house is… that's the family house. Don't you think you should give it more time? You've only been a widow for what, 8 months? I told him I had given it thought. He asked if we could talk about it more at Christmas. I said yes. Then he said he actually wasn't sure if he could make it to Asheville for Christmas. Lena's family was going to Cabo and he'd been invited. He said he'd let me know. I called Karen after. She was more direct. If you sell, she said, what happens to Dad's things? The furniture? The tools in the garage? I told her we would divide things fairly between the two of them, and any remaining items would go to donation. She said, I just think you're making a big decision very quickly. I reminded her that Gerald had been gone for 8 months. She said, it feels fast. I wanted to ask her what she thought slow would look like from Savannah when she had not once come to visit since the funeral. I did not ask that. I said I'd keep her posted. Noah called me 2 days later. He called completely on his own. I hadn't said a word to him about the house. But he had talked to his mother apparently, and he said, Grandma, I heard about the condo. I think that sounds like a great idea, and I want to help you move. Whenever you decide, just tell me the date. Just like that. No hesitation. No list of conditions. I put my hand over my mouth for a moment so he wouldn't hear anything in my voice that I didn't mean to show. Then I said, thank you, sweetheart. And I meant it more than he knew. The listing went up in January. The house sold in 3 weeks to a young couple from Atlanta, a teacher and an engineer, 2 small children, a dog. When the realtor called to tell me, I sat in Gerald's chair and held the phone in my lap for a long time after I hung up. I thought about the couple. I thought about the dog running in the yard. I thought, that house deserves more life inside it. That was the right thought to have. I worked to keep it. The closing was set for a Saturday in March. I told Michael and Karen in early February. I sent them both a message, not a call, a written message, because I wanted them to have time to think before responding, and I told them the date. I told them what still needed to be packed and loaded, and I asked if they could come to Asheville for that weekend to help me with the final move. Michael wrote back 3 days later. He said he was sorry. That weekend was the regional conference for his firm, and he'd been presenting for months. It simply wasn't possible to change it. He said he'd try to visit in the spring once I was settled in. He said, you've got this, Mom. Karen took 5 days to respond. When she did, she told me that she and her husband, Dale, had already booked a trip to visit Dale's parents in Hilton Head for that same weekend. It had been planned for weeks, she said. She said she felt terrible. She offered to video call while I was packing, so she could be there in spirit. She sent a string of heart emojis. I read both messages sitting at my kitchen table. The same table where I had sat for 41 years. The same table where I'd helped both of them with their homework, signed their permission slips, listened to their heartbreaks. The same table where Gerald and I had sat every single morning of our married life, drinking coffee in whatever light the season offered. I did not write back to either of them that day. I called Ruth instead. She came over within an hour, the way she always had. She sat across from me at the table, and I told her. She didn't say a great deal. She just nodded, slowly, in the way of someone who has already long understood something and is waiting for you to arrive at it yourself. You knew, I said. I thought it was a possibility, she said. I feel like a fool, I said, for expecting it. You're not a fool, she said. You're a mother. Those are 2 different things. She paused. What are you going to do? I told her I didn't know yet. But I did know one thing. I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Halloran, who I had worked with when Gerald and I had updated our wills a few years before. I made an appointment for the following Thursday. That appointment I want to come back to. First, I want to tell you about the week before the move. I had been packing slowly for months, the way you do when every box feels like a small funeral of its own. Gerald's study I left for last. I stood in the doorway of it for the better part of 3 weeks before I went in. His books, his fly fishing gear along one wall, a framed photo of him and Michael at the Pigeon River, when Michael was maybe 10 years old, both of them holding up a fish, squinting into the sun, proud in the specific way that men and boys are proud together at moments like that. I packed the photo carefully. I wrapped it in a dish towel. I thought about Michael a lot that week. I tried to be honest with myself. I tried to ask the question that is hard to ask. Had I done something to create this distance? Had I failed somewhere that I couldn't see? I turned it over and over the way you turn something in your hands, looking for a crack. And I want to be honest with you. I found some cracks. I found some moments I was not the mother I should have been. I found sometimes I had chosen ease over presence. But I also found something else. I found 31 years of showing up. I found hospital waiting rooms and school plays and moving days and wedding weekends and their father's last days and every ordinary phone call in between. I found a record that was imperfect, the way all records are, but that was present. And I thought, that has to count for something. Surely that counts for something. Noah arrived the morning of the move at 7:15, as I told you. He had those biscuits. He stood in the entryway and looked around at the half-packed house, and he didn't say anything sentimental, which was exactly right. He just said, "Okay, where do we start?" We worked all morning. Ruth came over at 9 with coffee and her husband, Frank, who was 73 with a bad knee but who insisted on carrying boxes to the trailer anyway, and who I would not trade for anything in this world. A young man from down the street, Marcus, who had mowed our lawn for years, showed up at 10:30 and asked if we needed an extra set of hands. Just appeared at the door. I hadn't called him. He said Noah had texted him the week before. That was Noah. He had quietly arranged help without telling me, without making a show of it. By 2 in the afternoon, the trailer was loaded. Gerald's chair was in there. The kitchen table was in there. The framed photo from the Pigeon River was wrapped in the dish towel, packed safely in a box that Noah had labeled in his handwriting. Grandma. Important. Handle with care. I stood in the empty living room for a few minutes alone. I asked Ruth to give me a moment. She understood. I stood in the room where my children had grown up, where Gerald had watched football on Sunday afternoons, where I had graded papers at 10 o'clock at night for 30 years. The hardwood floor was bare. The light came in through the south window the way it always had. I said goodbye to it the way you say goodbye to things that cannot hear you but need to be spoken to anyway. Then I walked out. I locked the door. I gave the key to the realtor. And I got into Noah's truck, and we drove to Merriweather Road. Now, the appointment with Patricia. I had gone to see her on the Thursday before the move. I sat across from her desk in her office on Lexington Avenue, and I told her what I wanted to do. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I respect about her. When I finished, she nodded. Gerald and I had written our wills together. The estate was to be divided equally between Michael and Karen, with smaller provisions for both grandchildren. That had been the plan. That had always been the plan. I told Patricia I wanted to change it. I was not acting in anger. I want to be clear about that. I had sat with this for weeks before that appointment. I had prayed about it, in the quiet way I pray, which is less like talking and more like listening. I had thought about what Gerald would say. Gerald, who was fair to his core, who believed in consequences, who also believed that love should be demonstrated and not merely claimed. I changed the will. The condo, my savings, and the bulk of the liquid estate would go to Noah. A meaningful sum would go to Gerald's niece in Knoxville, a woman named Bev, who had called me every week since the funeral without fail and who had driven up twice just to sit with me. The remainder would be divided between 2 charities we had supported for years, the Children's Literacy Program through the library, and the hospice organization that had cared for Gerald at the end. Michael and Karen were not removed entirely, but they were no longer the primary beneficiaries, not by a wide margin. Patricia looked at me for a moment after I finished explaining. Then she said, "Are you certain?" I said yes. She said, "I just want to make sure this isn't a decision made in—" I said, "Patricia, I am 72 years old. I taught other people's children how to read for 31 years. I am not making this decision in the wrong state of mind. I am making it in the clearest state of mind I have had in some time." She nodded. "We made the changes. I did not tell Michael or Karen. Not that week. Not for a while. The condo on Merriweather Road was smaller, of course, but Ruth had been right. It had its own light. The oak tree outside my window was large and old, and in March it was just beginning to bud, and I put Gerald's chair near the window, and I sat in it that first evening and watched the light change until it was dark. Noah helped me unpack until nearly 9 o'clock that night. Then he hugged me at the door and drove back to Charlotte, and I watched his taillights go down the street. I stood there until I couldn't see them. I called Ruth. She answered immediately, the way she always does. "How are you?" she said. "I'm all right," I said, and I meant it, which surprised me. I think I'm actually all right. Spring came. I planted herbs in pots on my small patio: basil, rosemary, a tomato plant that Noah had brought me as a housewarming gift. I joined a watercolor class at the senior center on Tuesday mornings, not because I have any particular gift for painting, but because Ruth went, and because it gave the week a shape. I began sleeping better. I began eating real meals again, which I had not been doing faithfully. Michael called in April. It was a good call, longer than usual. He asked about the condo. He said he was glad I was feeling more settled. Toward the end of the call, he mentioned, offhandedly, that he and Lena were thinking about buying a lake house and that the numbers were a bit tight. He didn't ask me directly for anything, but the mention was there, hanging in the air of the call like smoke. Karen came to visit in May, the first time I had seen her since the funeral. She stayed 2 days. She was warm, attentive, brought me flowers. On the second day, she walked through the condo and said she thought I'd made a good choice, that the place was lovely. Then she sat down at my kitchen table, the same table from Birchwood Lane, and asked me if I had thought about what would happen to the estate. She said it casually, as if the question had just occurred to her. I said I had things in order. She nodded. She didn't push. But she called again 2 weeks later, and then Michael called. And the calls had a new quality to them, more frequent, warmer on the surface, but with an undercurrent I recognized. I recognized it the way you recognize weather. I said nothing about the will. "I want to tell you something about the watercolor class. There was a woman there named Sylvia, 75, a retired librarian from Black Mountain, sharp as anyone I've ever met. She painted the most extraordinary still lifes. Every Tuesday she sat up beside me, and we painted our separate mediocre paintings and talked in the easy way of people who have no expectations of each other. One Tuesday in June, she said, without preamble, 'Do your children appreciate you?' I thought about it honestly. 'They love me,' I said, 'in the way that people love things they've always had and expect to always have.' Sylvia nodded, as though this was a precise and sufficient answer. 'That's a particular kind of love,' she said. 'Convenient love.' 'Yes,' I said, 'that's the word.' We painted for a while in silence. Then she said, 'My daughter is the opposite. She worries about me almost too much, calls twice a day.' She smiled. 'I used to wish she'd give me space. Now I'd give anything to have the kind of problem where someone calls too much.' I thought about that for a long time after. In July, Noah came to visit for a long weekend. He slept on my sofa, and we ate breakfast on the patio every morning, and talked about his work. He was in sustainable architecture, designing buildings, passionate about it in the way that young people are passionate when they've found the right thing. On Sunday morning, I made biscuits from scratch, the same recipe my mother gave me, and he ate 3 of them without any prompting and said they were the best thing he had eaten in months. I thought about Gerald then. Gerald would have liked this. Gerald would have sat out here on this patio in the morning light with his coffee and listened to Noah talk about his buildings and asked good questions. Gerald always asked good questions. I told Noah that. He got quiet for a moment, looking out at the oak tree. Then he said, "I miss him too, Grandma. I think about him a lot." "What do you think about?" I asked. "The way he made you feel like what you were saying was the most important thing in the room," he said. "I try to do that. I don't always manage it, but I try." I put my hand on his hand. We didn't say anything else for a while. We just sat in the morning light. In August, Patricia called to confirm that the updated documents had been finalized and filed. Everything was in order. She asked if there was anything else I needed. I said no, everything was as I wanted it. 3 days after that call, Michael phoned. It was the most attentive he had been in years, asking about my health, about the watercolor class, asking if I was getting out enough, if I was happy. I answered his questions. Somewhere in the middle of the call, gently, he circled back. He said, "Mom, I've been thinking Lena and I were talking, and we just want to make sure you're thinking about the future. The estate, I mean. Have you talked to Patricia recently?" I said, "Yes. Everything is in order." "And you're happy with, everything is set up the way it should be?" I said, "It's set up exactly the way I want it." There was a pause. "Okay," he said. "Good. We just care about you." "I know," I said. After that call, I sat in Gerald's chair by the window. The oak tree was in full August leaf, heavy and green. I thought about what Ruth had said at my kitchen table all those months ago. "You're not a fool, you're a mother." And I thought about what Sylvia had said. Convenient love. And I thought about Noah, showing up at 7:15 in the morning with biscuits from the highway and a rented trailer and a quiet text to a neighbor's kid who cut the lawn. I thought about Gerald, who had held my hand in the car. I thought about the 4 hours Noah drove, alone, to show up. I thought about the word show up, how simple it is, how everything fits inside it. I am not a bitter woman. I want you to understand that. I did not change my will to punish anyone. I changed it because I had finally, at 72 years old, decided to be honest about what I was witnessing. Love is not a feeling that stays private inside someone's chest. Love shows up. Love drives 4 hours. Love texts the neighbor kid without making a production of it. Love calls not because there is an estate to consider, but because it is a Tuesday and it wants to know how you are. I had given my whole life to the idea that my children would be that, and I grieve that they are not. I want to be honest. I do grieve it. There are nights in the condo when I look at the photo from the Pigeon River, Gerald and Michael squinting into the sun, and I feel the loss of what I thought we were as a family, what I hoped we were. That grief is real, and I am not done with it. But I am also no longer waiting for it to resolve before I allow myself to live. Ruth and I have started a small garden plot in the community space behind the building. Tomatoes, zucchini, a row of marigolds. On Thursday mornings, we go to the farmer's market and we take our time and we drink the bad coffee from the stand near the parking lot because it is a ritual now and rituals matter at our age. Sylvia and I have started meeting on Friday afternoons as well, outside the class. We sit in her kitchen or mine and she teaches me things about color and light that I only partly understand but that make the world look different when I walk outside. She says you don't have to fully understand something for it to change you. I think she may be right. Noah calls twice a week, sometimes more. He sends photos of his projects, buildings going up, drawings, a model he built out of cardboard and balsa wood that he photographed from every angle. Last month he called from a job site and said, "I'm standing on a roof right now, and I can see the whole city. I wish you could see this, Grandma," I said. "Tell me what it looks like." And he did. He described every detail. He took 5 full minutes to describe the sky. That is the boy who drove 4 hours. That is the boy who labeled the box. Handle with care. I do not know what the future holds. I am 72 years old, and I have learned that the future is not in the business of consulting us before it arrives. Gerald taught me that. The 11 weeks taught me that. I know that things will happen that I cannot predict, and that some of them will be hard. But I know some other things, too. I know how the light comes in through my window in the morning, and I know that the oak tree outside has a particular shape against the sky that I will never be tired of looking at. I know that Ruth will be at the market on Thursday, and that Sylvia will come on Friday, and that Noah will call. I know that Patricia has the documents, and that they are exactly as I want them, and that what I have built in this life will go, finally, to the people who have built it with me. I know that I stood in the empty room on Birchwood Lane and I said goodbye, and I locked the door and I walked out. And I know that I am still walking. I know that at 72, in a condo on Merriweather Road, with a tomato plant on my patio and a box of watercolors on my kitchen table and Gerald's chair by the window, I am not done. I am not diminished. I am not waiting for anyone's permission to be fully, quietly, gratefully alive. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. If you are listening to this and you know what I mean, if you know what it is to sit in a house that used to be full, to wait for a phone that doesn't ring, to give and give and give, until you have given yourself almost entirely away, I want to say something to you directly. You do not have to keep explaining yourself to people who are not listening. You do not have to keep setting a place at the table for someone who has chosen, again and again, not to come. And you do not have to be angry about it. You do not have to announce it or make it a confrontation. You are allowed to simply, quietly, redirect your love toward the people who have already shown you who they are, the ones who show up, the ones who drive 4 hours, the ones who send photos from the roof because they wish you could see the sky. I found my peace not by fighting for what I thought I deserved, but by looking clearly at what I already had. Ruth across the table, Sylvia and the color of light, Noah's voice on the phone, patient and real, describing a city spread out below him on a morning when the sky was more beautiful than he had words for, and he called me to try anyway. That is more than enough. That is, in truth, more than I knew to ask for. And if my children come around, I hope they do. Truly, the door is not locked. But I have stopped holding it open while standing in the cold. I have gone inside. I have made my tea. I am sitting in Gerald's chair by the window, and the oak tree is there, and the light is doing that thing it does in the late afternoon that I have no name for, but that I have stopped trying to describe and have started simply accepting. This is my life. It is smaller than it was, and quieter, and it is mine. That is the part they cannot take. Not the money, not the house, not any of it. The part that is mine is this. I am still here. I am paying attention. I am grateful. And every morning I get to choose that again, and every morning, so far, I have.